Is Canadian whiskey any good? Yes. End of video. I'm Daniel Whittington, Chancellor of Wizard Academy Whiskey Marketing School. I was guilty of this for a long time, of just hating on Canadian whiskey. And it's led me to sort of shoot this as a mea culpa. Try to help tilt the scales in the other direction. Of course Canadian whiskey is good, but I'm going to explain the context for this. So first let me posit something. Imagine, if you will, in a world. Imagine if the only thing you knew about Scotch was budget Chivas Johnny Walker Red, or whatever the most cheap blended Scotch you can get your hands on at $12 a bottle, which is, you can't do anymore. Imagine if the only American whiskey you had ever had in your entire life was Jim Beam White Label and Kessler's. Which Jim Beam White Label is fine in its own right, but imagine if that was the best thing or the only thing you'd ever gotten from America. Imagine if the only thing you got from Ireland was proper 12. And that's how you thought Irish whiskey tasted like. This is representative. Jim Beam White Label is American whiskey. End of discussion. You could be forgiven for thinking, living in Scotland, drinking all of these amazing single malts and things, as American whiskey's bullshit. I've had it. What did you have? Jim Beam White Label. I'm not wasting my time with American whiskey anymore. You see where I'm going with this, right? So Canadian whiskey represents, by volume, more than almost any other brands on the planet. Crown Royal, right? These are Canadian Club. The volume, the sheer volume across the planet of these, and they are representative of Canadian whiskey. And they are primarily aimed at people who want to rocks, mix, sparkling water, on the rum, Coke, mixed drinks, right? That's what they're blended for. Lowest, highest volume, lowest common denominator of like unoffensive. Just anybody, if you want to have a whiskey Coke and Crown Royal Coke, right? These are very easy drinking things. And they don't distribute all the really weird, interesting, nuanced, complex things as well, and haven't for a long time. They are now, but they haven't for a long time. And so in America, the majority, if you say, in America, tell me a Canadian whiskey to any American, they're going to name either Crown Royal or Canadian Club. I guarantee you, right? And if that's all you know, then what is your opinion going to be of Canadian whiskey? Now here's the thing. They actually have a really interesting approach to blending. They typically create two different styles of whiskey. This is very much like Ireland, actually, where they'll have a column distilled focused grain whiskey base, but it's not called grain whiskey, it's called the base whiskey, which is like makes up the bulk of the volume. And then they'll have what they call flavoring whiskey, which is really distilled closer to what we would consider to be bourbon production, or even single malt Scotch or single pot still production, right? Or single malt in Ireland. And so you have a more of a heavier flavored big pot still, or that combo like Kentucky does with a doubler sort of approach. And then that's added to this base spirit that's column distilled, closer to what Scotland and Ireland consider grain whiskey and what America would consider a light whiskey. And then these things are blended together to create flavor profiles. The really cool thing is they often age those components separately, just like Scotland does, right? And Ireland. Some brands, really only one that I know of, there might be more, blend these components into the barrels and then age it already blending. Interesting, right? And they have the ability, the 9.09, the 9% rule, right? Which is to add up to 9.09% of non-Canadian whiskey products. Now, people often think that means flavoring. It doesn't mean flavoring. It means wine or other aged spirits, right? Not just vodka, and not like flavoring cane juice or, sugar syrup or peach flavor. Or there are Crown Royal, flavored whiskeys, but that's not what that 9% rule is, right? And so it gives them a really broad palette to blend from. Now, you may argue about whether or not that should be a blending component, and that's a fair argument. But it is, and it allows them to create flavor profiles that wouldn't exist anywhere except for coming from Canada. And that's really freaking incredible and really unique, right? To be able to have rules that allow you to create flavor profiles that can't really be replicated anywhere else in the world. What a gift. Now, I know that Canadians have a reputation for being all friendly and whatnot, but the reality is they hoard the good stuff. It turns out They've just been shipping all the dreck over to us. Not the dreck, that's fine. They've been shipping all of the lowest, like cheapest whiskey over to us. And then they keep all the good stuff for themselves. Selfish. But as distribution has grown, we've been able to get our hands on more and more interesting Canadian whiskeys. The craft movement has exploded. And Lot 40, like experimental, think of Lot 40, and this is not their brand saying this is me, an analogy. Wiser's is the bigger, larger brand, and then there's small projects of the Lot 40 line, Corby Distillers, right? And Middleton is the big Irish distillery, and they have a little baby one called Method and Madness. They get to do all these side projects. To me, that's what Lot 40 is. It's Don Livermore's little chance to kind of play around with some interesting stuff. And this is rye whiskey finished in port casks. So almost entirely from just straight rye grain, column distillation, second distillation pot still, which is actually much closer to a Kentucky-style bourbon production with the first stripping run on a column moved into a pot doubler, right? Or a pot, yeah. The typical Lot 40 is American oak, and then they took that and they moved this into port seasoned French oak barrels. This was a gift from Teresa Smith, a Canadian whiskey smith, one of our level 4 whiskey sommeliers and a generous giver of delicious whiskey. I have to tell you, Teresa, that when Don came to hang out with me in the vault and he saw all the different Lot 40s and special editions we had, he was like, "How did you get all these?" And I was like, "Teresa Smith." He was like, "Oh yeah, Teresa. Of course you did." Oh man, this is a oak oil, wood oil, and plum. Sweet, dark fruits. There's a slight astringency to the nose that makes me think more of like the tartness of the peel of a ripe fruit instead of the fruit of the ripe fruit. Yeah. There's a prickly black pepper spice going on from the rye grain, and then it switches gears into a soft, almost sour, tangy grape, like fruit, but dried and tangy. It's not quite raisin, but it's like when you get a thing of grapes and take a bite of one and one's tart instead of like a sweet grape. It's heading that direction. So starts spicy, cinnamon, black pepper, and then switches gears into tart fruit. 53%, let's add a little water. Now it's turning jammy in my mouth, like straight up preserves on rye bread toast. I've never had that. I wonder what it tastes like. Random dense preserves on a toasted rye bread. Partway between a Reuben sandwich and a jam and toast. Whoa! Okay, the water just exploded the wood oak notes out of this. Because there's new American oak in this, evidently, and you can smell it. That is charred vanilla, burnt notes. It drinks a little less sugary, but still very sweet and soft. I liked it better without the water. It was gentle. It was at the right proof already. There is a tartness to this rye, and it is definitely rye. Now, remember that Canada uses the word rye as a synonym for whiskey, so pouring your glass of Canadian rye means that you might have a whiskey that has no rye in it. This one is mostly rye, and you can actually taste it. Where did I put my water? There it is. I'm going to take a little sip of water. Now, I'm going to say a couple of things. How do you get to try interesting Canadian whiskey? First, try side projects from the big blenders. Instead of trying to find Wisers, try to find special edition Wisers like the Wisers 18 or the well, you'll never get your hands on it, but the Dissertation, which was Don Livermore's, or a Lot 40, right? Or go after the craft guys, Shelter Cove, Glenora. There's so many new and interesting craft Canadian whiskey distilleries doing things much closer to what American craft or Irish craft is doing. And you'll get to try some really interesting things. I think there's plenty to love if you go looking for it. If you're interested in reading about it, I have a rule that I took from my dad, which was, if you want to understand something, don't read what the critics are writing. If you want to understand something, truly understand it, read the writing from people who love it and get some sense of why they love it. And that'll be a truer understanding of a thing, to read the writing of someone who loves something. And if you want to read the writing of someone who loves Canadian whiskey, then read any book by Davin de Kergamo, who is a really gracious human being and loves Canadian whiskey. And I highly recommend his books. I think he's on the 4th edition of Canadian whiskey right now. I could be wrong about that. Anyway, cheers to y'all. Go drink some Canadian whiskey. I'm really glad you're here. I know this isn't part of the video, and this is the like and subscribe section, but as I was walking away, I got Fig Newton so strong that I felt like I had just chewed on a Fig Newton from this thing. And it was not one of the easy ones. It was like the dark fruit Fig Newtons. If you like weird like that, then like and subscribe.